Hey guys, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the universal problems with Begode suspension system sticking. And this is going to be for almost all of the Begode wheels, the Master, the Extreme, the EX30, the Master Pro, the T4. All the wheels have a slider and stanchion assembly with a rear shock linkage design. There are a couple of problems that go on with it, and in this video, I want to address things that you can do to become aware why it's sticking and steps you can take to make it so it doesn't stick. Why am I doing this? First of all, I absolutely love my Begode wheels. I have a lot of Begode wheels. Next, I'm a pretty hardcore trail rider. I like big jumps. I shred it hard. I do big drops, sometimes shoulder high drops. And in those situations, my off road suspension has to be dialed in correctly. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. This is a Begode Master with some aftermarket parts. I was sent one of these excellent suspensions. I've got a couple hundred miles on it. I love it. This is a great suspension kit. But you'll observe that this part is orange on mine, where on a normal Master it's aluminum colored. So let's hop right into it. There are three main things I've identified that are causing suspension sticking problems. But let's first define some terms. In these systems, we have a stanchion, which is the stainless steel or chrome tube that mounts to the upper battery tray and it comes down to the lower battery brackets. Then we have a slider. My slider is orange. The stock ones are typically aluminum colored. Above the slider, we have a slider bracket, or you can call this a fork brace, where the suspension attaches um, on and connects to the upper battery tray. The first problem I discovered is that my sliders were not aligned correctly to the motor. What do I mean here? When this part is assembled in the factory, there's no aligning dowels. There's nothing to ensure that the slider is square to this bracket during assembly. They're just a couple of bolts, and if you put the bolts in, it's going to be pretty close, but there's nothing to make it aligned correctly. So what I found is here at the bottom, and this is universal across multiple Begode wheels, is that the lower slider where it bolts to the motor, where it's supposed to be parallel, um, mine was slightly trapezoid shaped, so it wasn't square to the motor. The motor spacing, the motor is 80 millimeters wide here at the bolted hub, and there's a 5 millimeter spacer on each side. So there's 90 millimeters of spacing between the inside of these sliders. What did I do to make this square again? I loosened my motor mounting bolts, and I came up and I loosened the upper slider bracket. I didn't take the bolts out. I backed them out about 2 millimeters all the way around, and that allowed 1 to 2 degrees of free play rotational for this slider independent of the bracket. I then came in, torqued up these bolts to make sure that the slider is square to the motor, and then I retorqued with Loctite the upper bolts. Why is this important? If this slider assembly is um, out, if it's not aligned, it's going to, when we tighten down the bolts, it's going to provide rotational torque inside the metal here. That's going to be translated to your bearings down here. And anytime a metal assembly is being forced to torque, it turns into a spring or it becomes a tensioned piece, which this is not supposed to be. When it's fully assembled, it should be non-tensioned, right? If the lower mounting surface is not parallel, it can provide undue uneven pressure to your bearing assembly down here. It can also lead to this whole wheel motor assembly not going straight. It can be slightly off to the side or the other. And the whole time it's under tension to try to force it out. So it might lead to the whole assembly wobbling more than it should. All right, next point. The stanchion top and bottom is held with the stock master system by squeezing, clamping the stanchion. This aftermarket slider is more of a Begode Extreme style slider where the stock master comes down without this cutout here. At the bottom, the stock Begode Master battery mounts and pedal hangers attached to the bottom of the stanchion by squeezing it. It's kind of hard to get it tight. It wiggles until it's torqued down really hard. And when it's finally torqued that hard, it deforms the bottom of the stanchion. It goes from round to oblong. Same thing here with the top. The top has a C-clamp type mount. When these two bolts become torqued, it also slightly deflects the top of this. There's another problem I'm going to address here in a minute. So I like this system because it mounts differently. There's no deformation with this style at the bottom of the stanchion. But the top, using a precision measuring tool, my tube is 0.9 millimeters, almost a full millimeter out of round when it's clamped. When it's unclamped, it's basically effectively perfectly round. But when it's clamped, it's out of round. And so what that means is that when my suspension fully compresses, it will get, while it's in the middle here, where the slider bushings are in the middle, the tube is round. When it gets to the top, it goes from round to oval shaped, and then that creates friction right here at the top. I'm not going to move it. You're just going to have to trust me. So that makes it so with this particular setup, when everything is aligned correctly, it moves freely at the bottom, but it gets friction and wants to seize at the top. If it's fully compressed, the out of round upper pipe will seize inside here and stick. Third problem. My hand's a little messed up. Third problem. When these two bolts on either side are clamped fully to the stanchions are supposed to be perfectly parallel. However, and they are when before you torque these down, but once those bolts are secured, it deforms the shape of this, and the stanchions become not parallel. Measuring mine, I am 97.7 millimeters inside to inside between the two stanchions. At the bottom, I'm a full 2 millimeters wider at 99.7 millimeters. When you loosen these bolts, it goes back to parallel. When you tighten them, it comes out of parallel. Why is this a problem? It means that if it's forced out at the top and forced back together at the bottom, it means your stanchion is going to have a bow to it, creating friction all the way through it and additional stanchion. What am I doing to address this? I'm still experimenting and trying to figure it out, to be honest. But I have added a small spacer using aluminum can. This is a 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter square, stacked 2 plies thick. One layer of aluminum can is approximately 0.1 millimeters thick. So 2 layers is 0.2 millimeters. With this clamp assembly, I like to think of it as having 4 quadrants. There's an upper and a lower, there's an outside, and there's an inside. Here, I added the 2 layers of aluminum can to the bottom outside quadrant of the clamp. And that was enough to help me get my stanchion alignment to become almost perfectly parallel again. As I experiment with different placements of the, I initially wanted to put the spacer on the upper inside quadrant, but it affected the general, some of the other alignment issues. So for right now, I think this is the best I can do. I have not found a solution for how to properly torque these bolts without creating an oval shape at the top of the stanchion. And if someone comes up with a good suggestion, I'd like to hear it. You might also observe that with this aftermarket suspension kit, that this critical stanchion retaining bolt is missing. It's not threaded and it won't fit. So I'm just going to live without that. Anyway, so real quick review again. The slider is frequently not square to the upper fork brace. You can loosen it and retorque it to the motor and then retighten it, and you can make this straight again. The stanchion mounting at the top and the bottom squeezes the stanchion too hard and it deforms out of round the stanchion. And then finally, the upper mount here, when you torque them, this whole system flexes enough to bring the stanchions out of parallel. Addressing that will make the whole assembly be able to move freely without additional friction just by moving. Ideally, you should be able to pick it up and drop it. I almost can do that right now. So it's just kind of, see at the top it's a little stuck, but at the bottom it'll just kind of fall on its own. There's still a little bit of friction, but it's good enough for the moment. All right, thanks for looking. I'm sorry for giving a long video, but also you're welcome. I hope that some of this information can help my fellow Begode trail riders out there who love their wheels get just that much more out of them. All right, go out there and crash every day. Have fun.